All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the LTJ podcast. Today we have a really cool episode that is going to focus on healing and what a journey of healing means and looks like.
With us today, we have Caroline Guirgis. She is a wife, a mother, an educator, and currently pursuing her doctorate in Christian leadership, in addition to also authoring over 10 books. So we have her here to discuss healing and trauma in relation to human trafficking.
Which is a rare occasion between everything she's doing for her to be at a podcast like this.
We are very blessed.
Yeah, thank God. Hi, Caroline. How are you?
Hi, John. Hi, Monica.
All right. So I guess, you've authored all these books and it focuses on healing and it focuses on this journey. So maybe we can start off just by hearing from you a little bit. What does it mean to go through a healing journey? What does that even, it sounds great, but what does that mean?
It's interesting you ask. I was having a conversation with a friend this morning, and I was sharing with her how most people don't realize they need healing. And I think when it comes to leaving the jar and human trafficking, that is much more obvious because you suffer trauma. So it's very obvious when someone suffers something like that, or abuse or domestic violence. It's very easy to see and look at someone and say they clearly need a lot of healing and a lot of restoration. But for the common person who hasn't endured that kind of suffering, most of us don't even realize that we need to be healed. And it doesn't really manifest itself until, I hate to say this, but most of the time in marriage. And not in the beginning of your marriage, but much later on in your marriage. That's why it's not shocking today when you hear people have been married for 30 years and are going through a divorce. And it's because they have endured so much pain and hurt and suffering all those years, and some of it could be trauma, and they didn't realize that they even needed to be healed. So I do believe we all need healing on some sort of level, right? And then for those who really suffer traumatic experiences, like, I'm sure a lot of the people that you see that come in and out of leaving the jar, we can't help them heal unless we heal first. Because then we will understand what the healing process looks like and what it requires. And it's a very rewarding journey if we embark on it the right way.
Just so we're all maybe on the same page, can we maybe get a working definition of healing and of trauma?
That's very good. I think for me, when I think of healing, it's mind, body, and soul, right? Seeking restoration with the God that I was created by, right? That to me is what complete healing looks like. Trauma is something that was done to you, right? It's invasive, it's painful, it's hurtful, it's brutal. It's really like suffering. And I'm not saying that other people don't suffer if they don't suffer trauma, but trauma to me is life-altering. It changes your mind, it changes your outlook, it changes everything about you because you were invaded. It's intrusive, right? It's very intrusive. So to me, that's how I distinguish between the two, and that's how I differentiate between the two, if that makes sense, right? Like, I think someone who suffers a traumatic experience is probably too blinded and too guarded to even know what a connection with God looks like and how badly they need it.
I usually try to ask very pointed questions because sometimes, like, if I'm watching the podcast, there's questions that are happening in my mind and I'm hoping somebody's going to ask them. So just simply, is there anybody that is beyond healing? Can a trauma be too big to ever be healed?
No, I think anybody can be healed. I don't think there's a trauma that, first of all, that means if there's a trauma too big to be healed, then it's bigger than God. And I don't believe there's any trauma or suffering that's bigger than God. Because God can heal anybody and any trauma. But I think the question comes down to, and I hate to say this, and I know it sounds really strange, some people don't want to be healed. Mm-hmm. Some people, it's much easier and more comfortable for them to live in the trauma and in the suffering than to seek healing. Healing is not an easy process. It is not easy by any means. So I hope that answered your question.
Yes, and I'm going to be like a little annoying.
You're not annoying.
And I'm going to restate the question even in a stronger way. So you said there's no trauma beyond healing, correct?
Right.
How about sexual trauma?
It's not beyond healing.
How about being physically abused by my mom or dad?
Also, it's not beyond healing. I will tell you though, it does damage you. It does hurt you. It does break you, right? But that doesn't mean because I'm broken, I can't be healed. Because then that denies the existence of God. Because what did God do with all the broken people in church? He took, in the Bible. He takes their broken pieces and he puts them back together. Does that mean they are completely 100% unbroken? No, they will be broken. And when you ask about sexual trauma, I know girls who have been violated sexually and who have chosen the path of healing, and though it's not hard, right? And part of that was forgiveness. And they are fully healed now, but there's still that pain and that brokenness in there. And that's normal and natural to live with, right? But it doesn't mean that you're not healed.
In relation to human trafficking specifically, can you maybe expand upon what type of psychological and emotional trauma they experience? Not in the sense of what is happening to them, but in the aspects of the lingering effects that they will have from experiencing such traumatic events.
Yes, that's really good. And to be honest, and I just want to be really honest and open, I haven't done a lot of research and spent enough time with people who have been trafficked. I think this is relatively new to me too, but I have seen some, and I can see the lasting effect it has on them. It's a different kind of pain and suffering than I have seen in anybody else. Like that suffering and the mark that it leaves on that person is definitely different than I have seen in any of the other people that I have known have suffered. And I think the one that really resonated with me, the one that really opened my eyes to that level of suffering was at the Leaving the Jars last, I think it was the last fundraiser they had.
Gala.
And there was a woman there who was trafficked by her own mother. And that really hurt my heart so much. And the fact that she does not even identify with that person as her mother, because she needed to separate the two. She needed to separate what a mother is and is supposed to do and what a trafficker is and what the trafficker did. So to her, she was no longer her mother, but she was her trafficker, right? And that level of pain and that level of suffering is incomprehensible. Like that to me, I cannot even fathom, especially when it's someone that is supposed to love you and protect you and take care of you. So I know I went off a little bit, but what was the original question that you were asking?
The specific psychological and emotional effects, that lingering effects, I guess, that they would have.
Well, it was really interesting because watching her speak and share, and I'm not saying it was without emotion. I'm sure on the inside when she was sharing with all of us, the remnants of the pain that it must have had on her. But the fact that she was still able to stand up there and share her pain with us to raise awareness so we now can turn around and help others who are just like her. But she didn't look like someone to me who is psychologically completely damaged beyond repair. But it doesn't mean that she's not suffering and she's not hurting. And to me, I kept asking her, how can she trust anyone anymore? If you can't trust your own mother, who can you trust? So I'm sure it had a psychological effect on her, but then wouldn't you agree with me if you were at that dinner? I'm not sure if you were at that dinner or not. Wouldn't you agree with me that it must have taken some miraculous transformation within her to be able to stand up there in the midst of her suffering, right, to help others? Because that's what she's basically doing. She said, I've endured this pain and suffering in my own life, but now I'm going to stand up here because of the God who touched me and healed me, and I want to pay this forward to someone else. or I want to make you aware of what's really out there and what happens behind these closed doors, because it is damaging. But she didn't look like she was damaged to the point of no return. And that's where it's a spiritual interaction and a healing that only God can do. None of us have that power. No matter what organizations we have, how much money we raise, no matter what we do, there is nothing that we can do that God does better than us. No amount of money, no amount of awareness. So she was obviously touched by the healer himself, that she's able to get up and pay it back, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think when she was talking to us, she had been in this healing journey, as you describe it, for quite a while, right? We weren't seeing her day one after, leaving this environment. But that kind of brings us to a point. I mean, if trauma and trafficking and all these crazy things can happen from such close family or friends, then what's the role of the community when someone is brave enough to come out and say, this has happened to me, or I'm looking for healing? What do we do as a community to help?
I think we already started doing it, which I'm really happy about, especially in our Coptic community, because I think when I was a little girl, I don't think the Coptic community would have responded the way we're responding today, which means there's growth, which means there is awareness. So we're doing something right and we're heading in the right direction. So I do love that our community now is rising up and first not passing judgment, because I know I have cousins and distant relatives in Egypt. When something like that happens to a person, they first blame the victim, like, you asked for it, or why did you do this, or why did you go there, or why did you, we first blame the victim, which I think as a community, we can't do that. We can't put it on them, right? Even if we feel like they're at fault, which I don't think anyone is ever. Like when a girl is not dressed appropriately and then something happens to her and they're like, well, she should not have dressed that way. No, I'm sorry. No one has the right to touch that girl regardless of what she's wearing and how she is walking. She did not ask for that. So I disagree with that. So I think we as a community are finally arising and realizing and recognizing that we are dealing with broken, shattered people, that we need to come alongside them and we need to help them heal. By not blaming them, right? By surrounding them with understanding, with compassion. Of course, the number one tool we have is prayer. But sometimes when you're in that shattered state, you're not ready to pray yet. Like, you made a very good observation that the girl, when she was speaking at the dinner, we're seeing her when she's practically towards the end of her healing journey. But what did she look like in the beginning of the healing journey? I'm sure broken. I'm sure crying, scared, right? Like isolated. And that's what we as a community need to make sure, is that we don't let these people go into isolation and making them feel like they're alone. They need to know that we're here for them and we're not judging them and we're not blaming them.
I'm going to go ahead and do a quick plug for the fact that one of the things LTJ does is we go out and we train people in different communities all over the United States and even sometimes overseas in exactly what Caroline just mentioned, which is how to respond as a community and what it is that you do that will be right for that person and what you might do that will not be right for that person and might bring more harm. So if you're watching this and you are from a community that would like to receive this kind of training, we'll make sure we put some information for you at the end.
I love that you do that, because I think we don't know how to respond to people who have been trafficked. We don't know how to communicate with them. We think that they're so fragile and they're so broken that anything we say is going to break them further. And we treat them differently than they probably want to be treated.
You mentioned earlier that some people are comfortable sitting in their brokenness. So for someone who's listening who maybe has taken that first step of recognizing that they need healing, what are some practical steps they can now take moving forward in order to be able to actually begin their healing journey?
That's a great question, and I hope a lot of our listeners are are really listening and ready to take on that, make that decision. But it depends on the community that you are part of, because I'm sure a lot of our listeners are from different communities, different cities, different states. What I like about what we have in our church is that we have access to people, be it starting with a priest, maybe one of our priests, and just telling him, I've been hurt and I need this kind of healing. He may not be the one, just because he may not be trained in counseling. Like, our priests are wonderful, they're spiritual leaders, but sometimes they're not trained in counseling, and the type of counseling you need, you might need someone who is an expert in that area. So I think if you are someone who is reaching out and asking for help, go to someone you trust within your church community, your school community, your work community, and share it with them and tell them, I've been hurt, I've been scarred. And because I work in a school, and I have a lot of students who will come to me and say, I need help. I'm not the one to help them, but I can help direct them to someone who can help them. And I think communities need to be prepared for that. And we need to be okay with saying, this is not something that I am, like, I don't know if someone who's been trafficked comes to a priest at St. Mark's and says, I just, I'm recovering, or I'm getting out of this and I need help, I need guidance. We have Leaving the Jar, where they can refer them to Leaving the Jar. So communities need to be set up and prepared to help all different kinds of trauma. Whether it's we have a lot of sexual abuse, more than we care to admit. And we have it in our church communities more than we would love to share about, right? But it doesn't mean it's happening. It is happening. And I remember years ago, I want to say 20 years ago, after I gave a talk to a college group at St. Mark's, and shortly thereafter, one of the college boys reached out to me and told me he's been sexually abused. I was shocked. I was like, there's no way. Not in our community. There's no way. We're Egyptians, we're Coptic, we're this, we're that. It doesn't happen in our... It happens everywhere else, but it doesn't happen here. No, it does happen. And I was immediately able to get him the help that he needed, and it had to be from outside our community because we were not prepared and equipped to help him just yet. I think we're getting there now, but we weren't there yet.
And I think it's really amazing that you say that, honestly, because I think part of the issue is like people not being receptive to even hearing that something like this is going on. And so I'm glad he had someone like you to talk to, where you were receptive and you were like offering solutions and help, because I think one of the biggest hurdles I think we need to get over as a community is being willing to accept the fact that there are some things that we don't really like, or that we aren't going to see that are very positive, that are happening, and it's unfortunate, but being able to recognize those things first, I think, is the first step in order for us to be able to actually resolve them. Right.
And I do have to share that had I not experienced my brother's trauma, I probably would not have seen this young man suffering. So right at that point was my brother. He was battling addiction, getting over it. Okay, he was recovering from addiction. And this is something that we as an Egyptian family, like I will speak about my family first, were not ready to admit that our brother he had an addiction to drugs and he needed help. And he got the help he needed. And as a result, he was able to recover. Had I not gone through that with John, my brother, I wouldn't have seen this kid's pain and suffering. I would have been one of those naive, conservative, Coptic Christian who would have been like, no way, not in our church. It's in your head. This didn't really happen. Because that is what John went through. Back in the 90s and in the late 80s into the early 90s, to say that someone is struggling with drugs in our church was tabooed, right? You're ostracized. You're shamed. But because we went through that with John, I was then able to empathize and see that young man. And then from that, because he felt safe telling me, so many others were able to come and share. and we realized we do have an issue that we need to address. Because that's a trauma that caused that young boy or that young college kid to leave our community for a while because he thought he was the only one. That's the other thing. When you're a victim of such trauma and abuse, you think you're the only one. And you run away. And had I not gone through what I went through with my own brother and my own family, I probably would have brushed him off and dismissed his abuse and made him think like, no, you're crazy. That did not happen to you. And don't talk about it. Because you're going to ruin the reputation of our community.
So, as an author of 10 books, you must have talked about the concept of forgiveness and the kind of power that comes from that. And I know this is not what we all want to hear, right? Like that we have to forgive the abuser. But I think there's two forgiveness, right? I have to forgive that person that did evil. But I also have to forgive myself because sometimes I'm almost like harboring bad feelings towards myself for allowing myself to be in that situation where this happened. So can you just tell us a little bit about why forgiveness has to be a part of this journey of healing?
I love that you asked that question. Because believe it or not, I learned about the power of forgiveness through a young girl who was sexually abused by a member of her church. And she kept it quiet for about 10 years, living out of shame, because she was led to believe by the abuser that it was her fault, and if she shares it with anyone, it will ruin her reputation and she will never get married, and basically filled her head up with a lot of stuff, which is what they do when they want to continue preying on that victim. Once she exposed it and got the help that she needed, and she went through the counseling that she needed, I was having a really good conversation with her about forgiveness. And she said that her true healing did not happen until she forgave the person who abused her. And I even asked her, how can you continue to see that person knowing that they were not punished for what they did? And she said she didn't forgive him out of her own power. She prayed and asked God to put that forgiveness in her heart. And once she released that person, she released him into the hands of God for God to do whatever his will is. Because the way God forgives us is different than the way we forgive one another, right? God's anger is righteous. God's anger leads people to repentance and leads people to confession. God's anger, the purpose of God's anger is to restore you and reconcile you and unite you to him. That's what God wants. God wants everyone to be saved and spared. And the way God will pursue even a person who does the abuse, right, is to hopefully find and reconcile with that person too. And if that person chooses not to, because they're so hardened and they still continue to choose the path of sin, that's between him and God. But she found peace in releasing that person into the hands of God. And I think if you read like a lot of our history, Corrie ten Boom, I don't know if you're familiar with her or not, and she I'm not sure if it was her or not, but it was basically where she and her sister suffered in the Holocaust at the hands of the Nazis, right? And her sister was brutally abused in the concentration camp, and she witnessed and watched that. I'm not sure if it was her or Anne Frank. I'm getting my history confused. But all that to say, she forgave the guard who tortured and abused her sister. And once she forgave that guard, and imagine forgiving someone who you know is the reason why your sister died, and your sister died at his hands. But forgiving him brought peace to her. It's a very hard process, but there is no way we're going to find healing without forgiveness. And the forgiveness cannot be by our own power and by our own strength. I too struggle a lot with forgiveness. I'm not a confrontational person. So I always used to think that I was a forgiving person. But what I found in myself, I'm just not a confrontational person, but it doesn't mean I forgave until I asked God to help me to forgive that person. And it takes years. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. But you can't have one without the other. You will not be fully restored in healing until you fully forgive. And honestly, the way I have found in my personal life, how do I walk through forgiveness, is when I see my sinful ways. When I look at the ways that I sin against the Lord every second of the day, right? Like, I don't deserve his forgiveness. I don't. Because even the little things that I think are not a big deal, like printing at work when I should really be using my printer to do work, not my personal printing, right? That to me is a slight way of stealing from the company, right? And you're thinking it's not a big deal. No, it is a big deal. It is a sin, right? And it requires forgiveness. So when I see my sinful ways and how much I need forgiveness from God, then who am I to withhold that from someone else, no matter what they did and no matter how evil it is? Because there are a lot of evil people out there. But who am I to say they don't deserve forgiveness? I'm evil too. Does that mean I don't deserve forgiveness? Of course I want forgiveness. But why is their evil worse than mine?
So, that's a good question. Why is their evil worse than mine? So society tells us it is, right? And I wonder if real healing, as you're describing it, you're saying it has to come from the Lord. It's countercultural, right? For some of us to say printing and my printer at work is just as bad as sexual abuse. But I think I'll leave that piece to our viewers to think about, because I think it requires someone to know the Lord to understand why those two things are still evil and maybe not one more than the other. We have a little book over here on the table.
It is titled Living Waters, A Journey to Inner Healing. It is co-authored by Caroline Guirgis. So we will leave information for this for you as well. It is a daily devotional that you can use to guide yourself in the journey of healing if you have listened to today and you are thinking that maybe there are some things you want to heal and some things that you want to work on. So we will leave information on this. We will also leave information on the general LTJ and our podcast down below as well. And so we will see you next week.
And
there's more.
There's more. We will leave information on some of the books that Caroline has written, and you'll find them on Amazon. So if you are going through the healing journey, this is a great journal for that. But there's also some other books that can really guide your journey there.
And I think you also mentioned before we were recording that she has a nonprofit that helps out with addiction as well. So if you or anyone you know also needs help recovering from addiction, we can leave information for that as well.
Absolutely. Caroline, thank you so much for spending your time with us.
Oh, thank you. And I love what you do. May God bless you.
God bless you too. And God bless you guys as well.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.